So are we close to being ready to start, or?
Yeah, Stephanie, would we be able to share our slides now?
Yes, we are ready. You're ready.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. Maybe we give another minute, Dr. Johnson, and we could get started if that's okay.
Just give me a cue when you want us to go. I'm
Okay.
ready.
Perfect.
I'm just curious, can you see a glare in my glasses from
Just a minute, you must.
Do I see a glare?
for my glasses?
The camera's from the top, so
Oh,
yeah.
It looks fine, Dr. Johnson.
Yes, it looks good. I think we could get going, Dr. Johnson.
thank you, and welcome to one of their series in advancing inclusion. And I'm Ron Johnson. I'm Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion here in the School of Medicine. I'm also a professor in the Department of Psychiatry. And I'll let Renuga introduce herself.
Yeah, Renuga Vivekanandan. I'm an associate professor at Department of Internal Medicine and Chief of Infectious Disease and Assistant Dean for Strategy and Accreditation at School of Medicine. And this topic is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm excited to be able to talk to you all today. And disclosures, both of us have no disclosures related to this topic.
Very good. So I before we get started, we're going to be doing a quick assessment using Polls Everywhere, and we're going to need you to dial in on you using your cell phone, the number 2, where you text, that is, the number 22333. And you'll need to do that now if you would.
And if you can type in to get into the series cardiac, CENTE 664, and the participation is anonymous, so no identifying. And it's also case sensitive, so it has to be capital letters. And we'll give you all a minute. Does that sound okay, Dr. Johnson?
That sounds good. Just don't make the same mistake I did by adding the R to the cardiac and the R to the center. There are no R's in this. So it's cardiac CENTE 664.
And is it all uppercase?
Yes,
All
it's
uppercase.
all uppercase, yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Should we go to the next, start the survey, Dr. Johnson?
Okay, so let's move to the survey if we could. First question's there. I believe that ethno-racially diverse individuals have a sense of belonging at this academic institution. And there are 5 options for choice. Just select the one that most closely fits how you think.
And these questions give us an idea of how we all are feeling, and in the future, what are the topics we need to address, areas we could address. I'm going to go to response.
Okay.
All right, and then I'm going to go to the next question.
The signage, for example, no tolerance for racism, etc., and walls of our institution proudly convey the sense of welcoming environment. Again, there's 5 options.
Should I move on to the next question?
Yes. When meetings are held, I feel that the voices of underrepresented individuals are heard and welcomed and not talked over. Looks like that's trending toward agree.
Yeah. And the next question.
I'm aware of the various types of microaggressions, for example, gender, race, disability, etc., and how they affect a sense of inclusiveness. Again, 5 options.
We have over 40 responses, 47, 50. So I'll go to responses. So trending toward agree.
Yes.
Perfect. And
I believe that ethno-racially diverse, a little typo there, individuals can voice contrary opinions without fear of negative consequences.
we have over 50 responses.
Looks like that's trending towards agree, with the largest group is disagree. So it's almost a split there. Okay, very good.
And this will capture some of our demographics. Again, it's anonymous. We have over 57, 60 respondents.
Oops.
Sorry.
Okay.
And then our next question.
What is the best fit your current role?
Yes. We have a lot of medical students and residents and faculty. Fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to do the survey with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Johnson and sorry.
Sorry. Well, we can go to the goals and objectives, I guess.
Yes.
So we've got 6 goals and objectives. First is to examine the role that inclusion plays in academic medicine, explain why inclusion deserves attention in academic medical settings, increase your perceptions of inclusion in academic medicine, and review how various actions are important in terms of just speaking as opposed to words. Actions speak louder than words, I guess, and share the creating of an inclusive environment for learners, and then review the takeaway message relevant to inclusion. So essentially, we're going to talk at you for about 40 minutes, roughly, given the time we've already taken. And then we're going to try to leave some time at the end for questions. So if you have those questions, please save them for the end. And we will certainly try to entertain and respond to those questions. So if we go to the next slide. So starting with some basic definitions in terms of what we think about. I mean, this is something that I always say, diversity, equity, inclusion is a journey for a noble cause. And of course, because we're a Jesuit institution, the things that we do in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion are fueled by our institutional mission, which basically is inspired by our Ignatian values, which puts a premium on both education and social justice. So next slide, please. trying to define some of the key terms here. Inclusion is the topic of this. So when you talk about inclusion, it means that you're acting in a very proactive, intentional, and continuous engagement with diversity. And that essentially includes things that we do with respect to the policies and practices that we promote full participation and this sense of belonging within the academic medical setting that we all work in. Okay, we believe that inclusion really is a core element for successfully achieving diversity. People have to feel included, and it's achieved by creating a nurturing climate and culture within this academic institution. So when that's accomplished, then the emergence of those two, diversity with inclusion, gives us this sense of excellence, which is what we are sort of striving for. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. I think your next slide is up.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. So I'm going to build a case for us why we need inclusion, and then we'll discuss solutions a little bit later. But I wanted to start off with some of the data from the business world. So Deloitte has done many large studies, and they were able to show that when you have a diverse company with diverse workflow employees, you have 2.3 times higher cash flow revenue. Inclusive teams have 30% higher performance, so which is really important. And Boston Consulting Group, another major firm, did a study on diversity, and they were also able to show, again, diverse and inclusive workforce, you have a higher percent of revenue, 19% increase in revenue. You know, if we think about healthcare, again, it's a business, so more diverse and inclusive environment we have, we'll have better outcomes and higher revenues as well. So, but the issue that they also noticed is that many companies, when they have, they believe they already have diversity and inclusive culture. But when they surveyed employees, however, only 40% of the employees felt that they had a fostering environment with an inclusive environment and diversity as their mission. So there's a little bit of disconnect from leadership in many of the companies versus how the employees are feeling. So how do we connect these two together and make an inclusive environment is where we need to go. So the question, you know, we need to ask is why inclusion deserves more attention in academic medical setting. So why do we need to do that? So shifting demographics. If you guys look in 2050, about 50% of the US population will be non-European origin. And over 10 million Americans will identify as LGBTQ+. Our middle class has shrunk from 57% in 1970 to 45% in 2018. There's a big change in socioeconomic background. So as healthcare workers, we need to take all these differences into account when we deliver care to our patients, which entails ethnicity, religion, gender, age, sexual orientation, socioeconomic background, language, education, ability, and geographic background as well. So we have to, on a daily basis, be thinking about these things when we deliver education and healthcare. So I do want to show some data from AAMC in 2019. They were able to show the workforce currently in 2018 when they did a survey. 64% of the workforce currently, physician workforce, is male, and only 35% is female. So as we all know, in medical school currently, we have over 50% equal amount of male to female ratio, but still as physicians start practicing, that number is going down for females. And I'm also worried with COVID-19, this will have more impact on our female faculty. And again, this is another data that shows the percent of faculty members across US medical school and their race and ethnicity. Majority, over 64%, is white, And if you look at Hispanic and Black, African American, they're both around 3 to 3.5%. But if you look at US population, about 13% of our population is Black and African American, and about 16% is Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin. So there's still a lot of disproportionately the physicians we have in workforce compared to our population who we want to take care of. And in academic medical settings, when we look at how are we doing with promotion and keeping our faculty members when they start as junior faculty later into tenure, only 4% of full professors are female. And in underrepresented minority, 3% of the faculty are Black, 4% of the faculty are Hispanic or Latino, and full professors, about 2%. So there's a huge disparity between the workforce and how we're getting promoted as our careers continue to go. Here's a really nice graph that was shown in AAMC as well. It illustrates we continually have higher amount of females matriculating through medical schools. And in 2017, 2018, we also had a slight increase in American Indian and Alaska Native matriculants in medical school. But our underrepresented in medicine learners still face a lot of challenge in learning environments. 2017 AAMC graduation questionnaire revealed 7% of responding medical students indicated that they were subjected to racial or ethnically offensive remarks by faculty, staff, and other learners. So where our learners, our medical students are learning, we still have a lot of work to do to create an inclusive environment where they are welcome and able to create a pipeline. A major initiative that took place in 2019 is that in medical school, LCME incorporated 2 major principles to increase diversity and inclusion, pipeline program and to increase diversity. But in 2019, when the AAMC released a report, they only saw marginal results, even though this was mandatory for all the medical school across US. The one thing to remember is that focusing solely on diversity doesn't create inclusion and doesn't keep our workforce into our community. So I really like this graph here. It shows that you have to have all 3 pillars. If you have diversity and inclusion, but if you do not have equity, that's not a winning equation. If you have diversity and equity, but if you don't have inclusion, a lot of people, you might lose workforce. If you have inclusion and equity, but if you don't have diversity, then you lose innovation and creativity. So it's really important to reach this winning area where we have all 3 pillars together. And if you look at our governing bodies, ACGME, LCME, and also healthcare, WHO, Institute for Medicine, their main message is in order to advance health disparity and increase good positive healthcare outcomes, we need to focus on inclusion and diversity. And why should we focus on inclusion diversity at Creighton in our own institution? Research has shown when we do focus on diversity and inclusion, we increase access to good quality, high quality of healthcare for our patients, broaden the medical research agenda. As a medical institution, university, this is extremely important to us. Advance cultural competence, support institutional excellence. We're always striving for excellence, and enhance education along the continuum. So this is why we need to have not only diversity, but inclusion. So AAMC again has really nice construct of where we were and where we are going. So in this journey of diversity and inclusion, we started with social justice movements, fairness and access for women and racial ethnic minorities. Then we work towards cultural competency, population parity, focus on recruitment and retention. But now we have to broaden the definition and focus on attraction and thriving, and move this concept of diversity, equity, inclusion from the periphery to the core of our mission and how we conduct our healthcare system and medical school. So we need to have a big shift in the way we think. It has to be part of our way we conduct ourselves on a daily basis. So diversity, equity, inclusion has to be incorporated on a daily basis on how we are coming to work, in our meetings, in our divisions, in our research, when we socialize with each other. This needs to be core principle for us to think about, not just a peripheral idea, but it has to become our daily practice. With that in mind, Dr. Johnson is going to talk about some best approaches for how we can advance diversity and inclusion and equity in our institution. And he will focus on cultivating an inclusive environment, teaching cultural humility, and building a collaboration trust within our entire community and institution. And prior to getting to that, we're going to discuss a little scenario. So I will give you all the scenario. So we have a meeting with 15 faculty members, a leadership meeting, 1 female faculty, and 14 male faculty. The topic of discussion at this meeting is how can we increase health disparity research in medical students? The female faculty says we should create a research interest group that can stimulate interest in our medical students. However, during this meeting, her input kind of goes unheard. And in 20 minutes later, a male faculty says, I think in order to stimulate research and interest, we should create interest group in our division. This input is welcomed and praised by all in the meeting. So now I would like everybody to think about, how does this female faculty feel? I have a feeling she probably feels not listened to and not valued and not heard. Dr. Johnson, how can we make the situation better when we run meetings?
Well, one, I think you have to name it what it is. This is a perfect example of a microaggression, a gender microaggression. And the female faculty member in this situation was invalidated as a result of what transpired during this occasion. So meetings is a good place to have the conversation in advance of meetings about how we want to deal with these things when they occur in the meetings that we hold, because they do occur.
Thank you. So good example of microaggression. I wanted to kind of share this MRI image. There's a lot of clinicians on here. So what the study showed is that when people in our work environment feel socially excluded, the pain that they feel is similar to pain that they can feel physical pain. So, it's really important to think about creating an inclusive environment, because we do not want our coworkers or learners to feel this type of pain by feeling socially excluded. So I wanted to kind of highlight that importance of inclusion and creating that environment, not only for their social, but also for their physical well-being. I'll pass this over to you, Dr. Johnson.
Well, we started out with that first case that looked at what happened in this meeting. And I think meetings is a good place to start to have the conversation about how do we want to handle microaggressions when they occur. And if this is the first time you've been exposed to microaggressions in terms of a concept, it basically are the kind of micro insults, micro invalidations that a person experiences that reflects some level of prejudice that contributes to a difficulty in maintaining or actually fueling the maintenance of the power structure. There are different types of microaggressions. They can be racial microaggressions. There can be transgender microaggressions. There can be disability microaggressions. They're all designed to sort of invalidate this person in one way or another. They can be conscious and they can also be unconscious. And so there's a book there, subtle acts of exclusion that will provide you with more information if you want to spend more time reading about this topic. One of my strong suggestions at the beginning of any academic year would be to kind of create a norm where you spend time dealing with microaggressions, talking about it, and how do you want to handle it in meetings where these things are more likely to take place. So we can go on to the next slide. And this is the case. Do you want to talk about the case or give us the overview of the case, Dr.?
Yeah, I'll do that. So this is another case scenario that we wanted everyone to think about. So we have a South Asian physician who's attending a faculty meeting. The chair of the meeting introduces this physician and unable to pronounce his name. The chair states your name has a whole alphabet. Then everybody starts laughing out loud. And also the physician, South Asian physician, has an awkward laugh. How do we think this physician is feeling at this moment? Dr. Johnson?
Well, I'm just speculating. Names are sometimes something that has a very, well, oftentimes it's something that has a very personal meaning for the individual. And so in this case, since this sense of invalidation occurred in a meeting where their name was pointed out, everyone started laughing. Obviously, that creates a lot of uneasiness in the part of the person experiencing that under these circumstances. What could the chair and faculty members have done differently? Well, one of the things would be, if you don't know how to pronounce someone's name, I'm sorry, I see your name here and I don't want to make a mistake in pronouncing it. Would it be okay for you to tell us what's the best way to pronounce your name, or ask other people in advance, do you know how to pronounce this individual's name, as opposed to making light of it by creating a joking situation over it?
Agree. I think in this situation, the physician might be laughing, but I'm sure inside the physician was feeling not part of the group and feeling hurt a little bit. So I think it's important we make all efforts to make all of us feel comfortable and inclusive.
So these are just some examples of things that have come up, and they're all issues or examples of what happens with respect to a microaggression. Looking at a person of color and saying something to the effect of, you speak English so well, where are you from? Or your name is so long, I can't really pronounce your name. Or wow, you don't look trans. How long did you become trans? I guess I would have never guessed you're gay. And then in response to some of these things, why are you getting so angry and aggressive? And then again, another one of those statements that sort of puts blames the victim of these aggressions, microaggressions. Why are you so emotionally sensitive? I mean, there are lots of examples that we could give, but these are some that we thought were more likely to occur. Again, they're unconscious. Microaggressions are usually unconscious, but sometimes they can be conscious, and they're designed in many ways to invalidate this person in some way. So we can go on to the next slide, please. So how do we go about creating solutions for intervention solutions related to this? It's rather complicated, as you know, but here's some things to think about. An institution obviously has a mission, a goal of creating the kind of environment that promotes a sense of inclusion. And that starts with the mission statement that communicates this idea that we have a strong commitment to diversity. And we want to send a very positive, affirming messages to individuals from diverse groups. How does that happen in the learning environment? That means creating the infrastructure necessary for supporting individuals who might be identified as, think of themselves as the other. So to create this sense of community by providing mentorship, scholarly opportunities, and a mutual understanding for everyone that's in this academic medicine family here at Creighton School of Medicine. Next slide, please. Cultural humility is very difficult to accomplish because it requires some level of motivation on the individual to engage in some level of self-assessment. That means that you have to kind of reflect on what you're thinking, what you're feeling, how you're responding. It's a self-critique related to a lot of things like your cultural identity and your awareness of the perspective of the other. And that awareness of the perspective of the other means, to what extent do I have the capacity to put myself in the perspective of this other person, to wear their skin, to see what they see, to hear what they hear, in order for me to sort of understand that. And I can't dismiss the significance of that, nor can I be foolish enough to think that my good intentions are enough to get me past this, because one of the assumptions that goes with that is the idea that somehow I've convinced myself, because of something in my own experience, that I already have credibility and I have cross-cultural credibility. And that may be in short supply in this person, even though they think of themselves as being well-intentioned and not wanting to hurt or harm anyone. Next slide, please. Okay, so building a collaboration of trust, it takes time to do this in an academic environment between individuals, those that are in the group that are identified as the underrepresented in medicine and those that are identified as the non-underrepresented in medicine. And that means a system that allows the easy reporting of negative experiences and having confidence that the institution will act on them or behave on them in some way. And that includes things which are done in a number of different ways, like how the curriculum is designed and how educational interventions are used to create the sense of being humble with respect to interactions with faculty and learners. Next slide, please. I also think it's very important to recognize the impact of implicit bias. It's kind of this unaware component to ourselves that we all have. I say all have in the sense that there are things about us that we're not aware of that can be viewed by the others as being problematic and something that you can't directly see. So we should try to work toward creating accurate measures of our competencies that are necessary for creating the kind of environment that we want to create. And this, I think, is one of our last slides. Basically, it's a slide that looks at what kinds of things could I do better. I mean, I place a premium on trying to be really good at listening. And I work really hard at listening because that's important. And people that feel disconnected sometimes from the community of the culture that we're trying to build often report that they don't feel like anyone is listening to them. And then the other thing I think would be important too, as we look at all of these, because they're all important, would be how do I mobilize the sense of the power that empathy can accomplish? So empathy can accomplish. And empathy here is this act of being able to feel, put yourself in the perspective of the other. And that sometimes can be quite challenging. And I think that that's our last slide. Oh, no, we got more. Okay, good. Takeaway messages. So what did I take away from this? One, the collective success of an academic medical setting depends on people proactively seeking diverse perspectives. So I want to invite conversations, input from diverse perspective. The School of Medicine has been more intentional about incorporating core values of diversity and inclusion as a central theme in our strategic planning process, which is still going on. Dr. Savolis is leading that. It's been going quite well. Next slide, please. And then a question I always ask myself, what is your personal and professional benchmark for success when it comes to inclusion? What are you doing individually to sort of move in that direction yourself? And we have a diversity inclusion portal that we're trying to get up and going that will allow individuals to create their own profile of diversity with respect to whether or not they're a medical student, faculty member, administrator, fellow, you name it. But realistically speaking, even as we're sitting here and we're doing this presentation today to talk about this, diversity inclusion remains a very contentious issue in academic medicine and the broader society. And it doesn't take much to sort of see that. But we're hoping that we can kind of create the culture where we can have conversations like we're having today about this very, very important topic. Next slide, please. And that is it for us. So I saw several
I have
questions.
some questions. Yes, Dr. Johnson.
Okay.
Can you tell us the difference between racism and anti-racist? Can you give us some examples?
Well, an example of, first of all, let's go back to something that it's here true at the institution. Father Hendrickson, some time ago, stated that Creighton, the university, is an anti-racist institution. And so I was really enthused when I heard him say that or read that. And so when you say that you are anti-racist, it means that you're not a bystander when you see things that are racist, and which means that there's some type of discrimination or singling out based on race. Anti-racism means that I have to take an active, or I would say in this case, proactive role in doing something. I can't just sit back and say, oh, it's too bad that that's occurring, or express my verbal sympathy for what's occurring. But anti-racism requires you to do more and be more aggressive in terms of speaking out, doing what you can to eradicate the barriers, confronting the situations that occur. When you see a microaggression, it might be a good idea to stand up and talk about that microaggression, confront it in some way. Or if you see someone being exposed to some type of racist behavior of some kind, anti-racist would be someone who would speak up under those circumstances.
Yeah, I really like how we touch base about microaggression, and sometimes we might need tools how to address microaggression as they're happening. Again, like you described, Dr. Johnson, there's a lot of unconscious bias. And if we create a culture where we can say to a colleague, well, I found that hurt my feelings. So how can you address sometimes what other tools can we use when we hear personally or when a colleague is experiencing?
One thing again, meetings for me is the one place where I get the biggest concerns expressed by people in terms of their experience with microaggressions. And because meetings are common in a lot of different settings, particularly in an academic medical setting. So if we have a group that's meeting, a group of us are meeting, a department or whatever, it might be good at the either beginning of the academic year to have a conversation about microaggressions. What's the culture we want to create in our department when this comes up? Talk about it in real detail, and what's the best way for me, and these are called micro interventions, what's the best way to address these when they occur? I want someone to tell me when I'm saying or doing something that they find to be offensive. I'm not defensive about that, but I want to create the kind of environment where I can be aware when someone brings it to my attention, an example of cultural humility, that I've done something or said something that person has found offensive and it hurt them for some reason. And my response should be, I want to know more about that. I want to apologize for that. And move past that because I need to step into that person's experience. So those micro interventions are designed to do that. But to make that happen, you have to be very intentional about creating kind of academic climate where that is the norm. The norm is if you've been offended by those kinds of things, it's acceptable, it's expected that you would talk about it and bring it to someone's attention.
Thank you. That's really valuable. And I think taking back to how instead of talking about it peripherally, making sure we incorporated that into our daily way, how we show up to work and how our divisions and departments function would be key. Next question we have is this an important, this is an important seminar. Thank you for presenting. Diversity also includes those with neurodiversities, physiological diversity, physical diverse abilities. How can these individuals also be included in diversity, equity, inclusion in academic medicine?
They are, and I'm sorry that I didn't give enough attention to those topics with physical disabilities and other kinds of disabilities. The list goes on. but certainly we want to be very sensitive about those issues. And more than sensitive, we have to be proactive in creating an environment where we are aware of what those are. What types of accommodations are being extended, classrooms in terms of hearing impaired, and how we address those issues when they occur. Again, being proactive, thinking about it ahead of time is very important, because classrooms need to be structured in ways that allow for those that have those kinds of disabilities to have easily access to those rooms. I remember once at another Catholic university, where I had a class where I had a student who was wheelchair bound, and she could not get into the classroom. And I'm dating myself by saying this, but this is a time when we didn't have the video projection device already installed. So you literally had to carry them to the classroom. And I would set my camera or my projection device up in the front of the room. And so when some folks would try to come in, they couldn't get in. And she was in a wheelchair, so she couldn't get into the classroom. So I had to take everything down, let her back, let her into her seat, let her into her area where she positioned her wheelchair. Embarrassingly so, at the time, she also had to go to the restroom during the class. And so I had to take everything down. First of all, she had to tell me this, and then I had to take everything down. And then so that next day, I wrote the most scathing letter to the facilities people, and they immediately put me in a very nice classroom that was easily accessible. But it took the effort on my part to initiate that, to make that happen for that particular student.
Thank you. Next question we have is, could you say more about how awareness of structural racism among medical professionals, teachers, and students would improve our efforts to DEI efforts? I think this is part of our hope, starting the inclusive series, advancing inclusive series initiative, is that we need to start becoming more aware, listening to each of our stories, and more we get to become aware and learn about diversity, equity, inclusion, that we can have more awareness and we can advocate for each other. So I think we have to create a culture, and slow and steady we could do that. What do you think, Dr. Johnson?
I would agree. The other thing I would add to that is we have to create a critical mass. And that critical mass means there are individuals who are representative of various groups, that we have allies. And I know that I have a lot of what I call my diversity inclusion allies that I rely upon to give me feedback, give me suggestions, and that really helps. But for us here as an academic medical setting, we need to have that critical mass. Once you have that critical mass of diversity, then you have the kind of ambiance, if you will, to make people feel included, wanted, appreciated, and supported when they need to be supported.
The next question is, how about anti-racist policies? We say that is the way we do things, question mark. Anti-racist policies for our institution.
I'm not sure how do you get rid of them, or what? I mean, what are they asking?
Yeah, I'm assuming that, we need to make sure as an anti-racist university that we need to make sure we have policies and procedures in place to reflect our mission. And I slow and steady work towards that. Next question. Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead to the next question.
Reproductive justice is also an important part of equity. The interesting oppression that many folks feel is worsened by the inability to determine their reproductive future. What is the school doing to help community realize their reproductive goals?
It's not a question that I feel like I'm skilled enough to be able to answer, so I'm going to have to on that question.
Myself as well. I'm not skilled enough to answer in that question as well. Next question is, while well-intended, I fear that promoting inclusivity as a way to increase revenue productivity makes the inclusion and value of marginalized people conditional upon quantity of money. How can we better approach this? No, that's a really good point. The reason we were trying to bring that to point to light was that if we have, it's not just revenue. Anytime you have a diverse workforce, you increase innovation, you increase healthcare, you increase collaboration. So that was the intention, showing that you will have a really excellent institution with really good production and lots of different pillars for teaching, learning, research. I always thought that academic folks are more enlightened than most, with maybe less racism, etc., than the rest of the country. Is this true? Dr. Johnson?
Well, I like to think we're all enlightened in some way, and that I don't know if that's true. Sometimes I have to confess that I've stopped watching some of the news, talk news shows, because I find my intelligence is sort of declining as I watch those shows. But I don't know if there's any data to suggest. One could argue, I guess, if you're working in a medical setting, that perhaps that group has a higher IQ quotient. But then sometimes when I see things that come across my desk, I sometimes wonder about that. But so I don't know if there's any studies, if anyone knows, and I'd be interested to know that fact as well.
And I also think that it's important to look at the data that we presented earlier. We have a lot of work to do to keep, not only recruit, but have an inclusive, diverse workforce and retention. So as much as we might be aware of this, I think we're still have a lot of unconscious bias and microaggression in our institution and all the institutions. So we really have to create a culture where we make people feel welcome. And that has to be part of how we do things on a daily basis. And like Dr. Johnson said, we have to, when we see things and when we create a culture of understanding, we can then help our colleagues. We have another question. This was a fantastic presentation. I think the concept of cultural humility is so important. How can we help encourage cultural humility and encourage education about unintentional and intentional microaggression?
It's a good question. I think that humility, it means that the person has kind of like this internal component of themselves that is humble in nature. And that means when you take it into the context of culture, that you are invested in trying to be humble as your approach. If you've ever, and I know some of you have, but when you travel overseas and you live in different countries or work in different countries, and I've done that, that perspective of looking and living in a different culture forces you to have some level of humility, because you recognize that your culture does not often mesh with the culture that you're in. So you have to take your dominant culture that you come with has to take a back seat to the culture that you're living in order to be effective in engaging that new culture. And I think we did that here more, but it has to be something that the person, in my view, is motivated to do. Not everyone is motivated to move in that direction. Not everyone is motivated to be humble. Not everyone is motivated to embrace and understand the differences that exist. Not everyone is motivated to understand what it's like to be the other and being aware of those things. And so that creates more of a challenge, I think, but it certainly is doable, but it's something that I have to reflect on myself and do my own self-assessment. Where am I with this? And do I have people around me who can give me feedback when I move away from that? And I have to be able to accept their feedback when it occurs, because it's very important in terms of shaping my behavior, my dispositions, and the skills that I might be able to develop in working effectively with diverse populations.
And I also think leadership, and all of us are leaders, making sure we emphasize the importance of cultural humility and inclusion and diversity. The more we do that, more others will follow, and we create that culture as well. We have another question. How can medical students address microaggression that they may encounter with the preceptor or attending, and having that power dynamics? And I think this is a really good question.
Someone has responsibility for orchestrating that experience of some kind. it might be good to send an email to either the instructor or whoever who's responsible for that, and maybe even try to get them to have a broad conversation in the experience as a whole as to what do we do when we encounter a microaggression? How would you like that to be handled? What should we do under those circumstances? So you have that conversation at the very beginning, and it sets the foundation for how you approach it when it occurs after that. Assuming the instructor or whoever's coordinating is receptive to that, it can be a very productive kind of thing. But in all these areas we're talking about, there's some overarching person who's responsible for coordinating, supervising, or directing. So floating that individual an email will talk about to identify how important that is and how we're going to handle that when that occurs would empower individuals to have that sense of power and balance to be able to do that in a very safe way without fear of negative repercussions as a result of bringing those things up.
And I also think there's an opportunity for our medical students and residents and fellows to also come to our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion as well when they have these experience. And our office can then also reach out to a certain individual or department to give more education or, cultural awareness and cultural humility. So I think there's, due to the power difference, if our medical students are feeling not able to talk to the preceptor or directly, then always reaching out to Dr. Johnson's office is.
I'm sorry, I didn't even think of that. I should have thought of it instinctively. Yes, that option is always on the table. And I get a lot of emails and calls about just these kinds of things. And I oftentimes always will follow up, and I have done meetings with individuals to get more details about what they're going through to support them, but also to offer some kind of guidance in terms of what the next steps might be in terms of resolving whatever concerns they have.
And next statement we have is, I think setting a tone of how microaggression would be addressed early on each year is important. However, I also think it's important that the onus is not always on the person that is affected to speak to the perpetrator. Agreed. I think that's why we have to create a culture where we can see these microaggression and be the ally, you're echoing, just like that example of how that female faculty, when she had an idea, but if you had another male faculty echo her idea and be an ally for her at that moment, I think those type of culture change will really go far. So we all have to be able to be aware and be able to help our faculty and students. Dr. Johnson?
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I also think too that the curriculum, the structure of the courses could be organized in a way that that's one of those pieces that gets talked about at the very beginning of the course, of the experience, so that people already have the platform established for getting those needs talked about, and then there's a mechanism for making that happen when it does occur. But I recognize that there's a power differential component, and folks may not feel inclined to do that. And if you don't, then you can always reach out to our office and we will give you additional support and guidance in terms of how to make that happen.
And then we have another question. Could we return to value of social justice? A lot of focus here have been on individual action. What does Creighton need to do to recruit more historically marginalized minorities into medical profession?
Well, the social justice, education and social justice are St. Ignatian values. That's a mission-driven focus of the institution for one thing, and there is a commitment to doing that. How do you go about doing that? Centers on a lot of different things. Most notably, cost factor is big because although Creighton, I think the numbers are something like we actually admit 6 times the number of students that we actually matriculate. So we're really robust in terms of extending offers, but where it falls apart sometimes is the scholarship dollars are not there. And there's a lot of data that talks about what a person comes in with debt and certain diverse groups obviously have more college debt coming in. And so that's also something that figures into their equation. It's an economic thing, but to do more to recruit also means that once you get them here, you have to have the academic resources to support them, the infrastructure necessary to support them. And you might find too that once a student feels isolated on say basis, they may not reach out. And maybe they're not reaching out because they don't identify with the individuals that are there as supposedly as a resource, or there is no credibility. So on several levels, one would be to obviously expand the number of scholarship dollars that are available and allocated for diverse populations, being more aggressive in our pursuit of those individuals. And then once they get here, from a retention standpoint, what kind of infrastructure do we have in place that will support them when they have issues or concerns that come up, and be proactive in reaching out to let them know, we know that you might be feeling the other or whatever, and we have created the structures for supporting you and helping you and encouraging you in various ways.
I just want to follow up on that point, Dr. Johnson. When AAMC did their data on medical school, exactly what they found was we're now increasing diverse students, but we're not able to keep them. So that's one of the big reasons, we need to focus not only on diversity, but inclusion and equity to create that environment where we have all three pillars for our learners and faculty.
Well, it's a big challenge, and I would invite any of you that have any interest in these areas to follow up with us after this to talk more about it, or to come up with ideas that we could certainly use to keep building on the diversity and particularly the inclusion piece here at Creighton. So, yeah,
and thank you so much for attending. And we plan to have a couple more School of Medicine grand rounds on this topic, as well as town halls. So looking forward to more interactions, and thank you.
Thank you.